When you spend your life working night shifts, you get used to the quiet, the kind of silence that hangs in the air like a heavy blanket. Schools are the worst for it. Endless hallways that echo your footsteps, rows of lockers like watching eyes. Classrooms frozen in time until morning comes. I'd been working as a janitor for 15 years, and by then nothing surprised me anymore. Kids snuck back into buildings, alarms malfunctioned, pipes clanged like dying animals. It all became routine. But what happened in that school? That wasn't routine. That wasn't anything I've ever been able to explain. It started with a door. I'd been assigned to an older high school on the edge of town, the kind that had been patched together with multiple expansions over the decades. Half the building looked like it belonged in the 60s. The other half felt barely functional. The floor plan was a mess, twisting hallways, random stairwells, and dead ends that seemed to go nowhere. One Tuesday night around 1 a.m., I was mopping the second floor hallway near the science wing. That wing always made me uneasy, mostly because it was isolated, far from the main office and cafeteria. My flashlight barely cut through the dim yellow glow of the emergency lights. That's when I saw it. A door at the end of the hall. Now, I'd worked that floor plenty of times before, and I knew every classroom, every closet, every dent in the walls. But this door, I swear to God it hadn't been there before. It was plain, unmarked, with a tarnished brass handle. I hesitated, mop still dripping on the tiles. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a storage closet I'd just never noticed. Maybe I was overtired. Still, I had to check. I opened the door. The smell hit me first. Musty, stale, like a room sealed for decades. My flashlight beam swept across rows of old wooden desks, their surfaces scarred with carvings and initials. A chalkboard covered one wall coated in a thick film of dust, though faint writing still lingered on it, like half-erased equations. It was a classroom, but not like any still in use. The furniture looked ancient, the kind you'd see in black and white yearbook photos. Dust hung in the air so thick it sparkled in my light. My skin prickled as I stepped inside. The strangest part? It felt warm. The rest of the school was freezing, but here the air felt heavy and almost humid. I walked between the rows, my boots creaking on the warped wooden floor. Each desk had scraps of old paper stuffed inside, faded and yellowed. One still had a pen resting on it, dried ink pooling at the tip as if it had been dropped mid-sentence decades ago. Then I heard it. A whisper. So faint, I almost thought it was the ventilation. But then it came again, high-pitched, childlike. A giggle, the hairs on my neck shot up. My light jerked across the room, but nothing moved. Empty desks. Empty shadows. I backed out fast, heart hammering in my chest, and shut the door behind me. The next day, I asked another janitor, an older guy named Carl, if he knew about that classroom at the end of the science hall. He frowned and shook his head. "Ain't no classroom down there," he said. "Just a wall. Always has been." I didn't argue, but that night I went back. The door was there again. This time, when I opened it, the room looked different. The chalkboard was clean. The desks were arranged neatly, papers gone. And on the far wall, faint writing glowed on the surface of the board. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight. It said, "Welcome back." My throat went dry. I didn't go in further. I slammed the door and walked away as fast as I could. For a few nights, I avoided that wing altogether. I convinced myself it was exhaustion, my mind playing tricks, but then something made it worse. I left my mop bucket in the hallway one night just outside the strange door. I was called to another wing for a spill and didn't come back for an hour. When I returned, the door was open and my mop bucket was inside, dead center in the middle of the rows of desks. I froze in the doorway, staring at it, bile rising in my throat. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. The whispers started again, this time dozens of them, overlapping, hushed voices filling the air, all just beyond understanding. My skin crawled, my chest tightened, and without thinking I bolted in, grabbed the bucket, and ran. When I slammed the door shut, the whispers stopped, but the handle rattled behind me, like someone was trying to follow. The next day, I went to the office to look at the blueprints of the building. One of the secretaries pulled out the original maps and renovations. I traced the science wing carefully, searching for that room. There was nothing, no classroom, No door, just solid wall. I wanted to quit right then, but I needed the paycheck. For weeks after, I avoided the wing. Sometimes, though, I'd hear faint knocking coming from behind that wall. Not from the door, because the door wasn't there anymore. It had vanished completely, but the knocking was real. And sometimes, if I stayed too long in that hallway, I'd hear a voice, faint, breathless, right against my ear, come back inside. I never did, and to this day, I don't know what would have happened if I had, but I can tell you this. That school doesn't have a forgotten classroom. It has something else, something waiting for someone stupid enough to stay. And if you ever find a door where there shouldn't be one, don't open it. I never liked the school library. It wasn't the books. I actually liked reading when I was younger, but that room had a strange atmosphere even during the day. It was too big, too quiet, and too dimly lit. The high windows let in streaks of sunlight that always seemed dusty, like the glass hadn't been cleaned in decades. The shelves were tall, casting long shadows. Even when the place was full of kids, it always felt empty. At night, it was worse. The library was the last stop on my rounds as the night janitor. I'd vacuum the carpets, wipe down the study tables, check the doors, and switch the lights off before locking up. I always left it for last because I hated being in there alone. I know that sounds stupid. It was just a room. But there's something about libraries at night. The silence isn't peaceful, it's heavy. Like the weight of all those books is pressing down on you. Like the shelves are watching. For the first few months, nothing strange happened. Just the usual creaks and groans of an old building settling. But then, the lights started turning on by themselves. It happened at 2:07 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd just finished mopping the hallway outside the library when a faint glow spilled under the door. At first, I thought I'd forgotten to turn the lights off. Annoyed, I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and walked inside. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly. Half of them were on, flickering in uneven patches across the ceiling. But here's the thing, I knew I'd turned them off. I was obsessive about that. The principal chewed us out constantly about wasting electricity. I had checked the switches. I was sure of it. Still, I chalked it up to old wiring and shut them off again. I locked the library, went back to my cart, and tried to forget about it. But the next night, the same thing happened. Same time. Same flickering pattern. By the end of the week, it was happening every night. One night, I walked into the lit-up library and noticed something else. The chairs had been pulled out from the study tables. Not all of them, but enough to notice. Maybe 7 or 8. Scattered randomly like people had just been sitting there and stood up in a hurry. That bothered me. I knew I'd pushed them all in the night before. I made a point of it. I checked the security camera footage the next day. Our system wasn't great. Grainy black and white video with no sound, but it covered every major room. I fast-forwarded to around 2 a.m. and watched. At first, nothing. The library was dark, empty. Then, without warning, the lights blinked on. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The chairs started to move. Not all at once. Slowly. One by one. They scraped back from the tables with deliberate slowness, like invisible students were taking their seats. My stomach turned to ice. I clicked through the footage again, frame by frame. The chairs moved in the exact same way they had looked when I found them. But there was no one there. After that, I started dreading 2 a.m. I tried to adjust my schedule, clean the library earlier or leave it for last. But no matter what, by the time 2 a.m. rolled around, the lights would flicker on by themselves. One night, I decided to test it. I sat at one of the tables with my mop and bucket staring at the clock on the wall. My hands were sweaty, my chest tight. A.m. Nothing. 5. The overhead lights buzzed and clicked. One by one, they flickered on. The whole library glowed faintly, shadows stretching across the carpet. And then I heard it. A giggle. Faint. High-pitched. Like a child stifling laughter. I spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. Just rows of books and empty tables. The giggle came again from behind the shelves this time. Then another from across the room. I stood slowly, gripping the mop handle like a weapon. Hello? My voice cracked. Silence. Then all at once the laughter exploded. A dozen voices echoing between the shelves, overlapping, shrill and mocking. It filled the entire library, bouncing off the walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I ran. I didn't even bother turning the lights off. The next day, I went straight to the security office. I told myself I wasn't going to watch, that I was done, that I didn't need proof. But I had to know. The footage from the night before was waiting. I fast-forwarded to 2 a.m. The lights came on. The chairs pulled out, and then I saw them, figures, dozens of them. Pale, blurry shapes seated at the tables. Some leaned over open books. Some sat still, staring straight ahead. Their faces were indistinct, like smudges on the tape. But they were there. And in the corner of the room, at the very table where I had been sitting, there was another figure, me. I froze. It was me. Same clothes, same posture, sitting with my mop and bucket. But the me on the tape wasn't looking around in fear. He was sitting perfectly still, head down, like he was reading. And all those pale shapes were turned toward him. Toward me. That night, I swore I wasn't going back in. I skipped the library completely, told myself it could stay dirty for once. But at 2 a.m., walking past the hallway outside, I noticed the glow under the door. The lights were on. Something pulled me toward it. Not curiosity, something heavier, like pressure in the air, dragging me forward. My hand trembled as I turned the handle. The library was lit up. Every chair pulled out. Books scattered across the tables, and in the far corner, I saw myself. I was sitting at the table, hands folded on an open book. My head turned slowly toward me. My own face stared back. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My breath came fast, ragged, my vision swimming. I turned to run, but the glass wall beside the door caught my eye. And in the reflection, I wasn't alone. Dozens of pale, faceless figures stood behind me, crowding the hallway, pressing close. Their heads tilted in unison as I stared in horror. When I spun around, the hallway was empty, but the reflection remained. I quit the next day. I didn't give notice, didn't collect my last check. I just walked out. I don't know if anyone else has noticed the lights. I don't want to know. But sometimes late at night when I pass by a window, I see something that makes my blood run cold. My reflection standing perfectly still, even when I'm moving, and behind it, rows of pale figures waiting. I've worked plenty of jobs I didn't like, but there's something about working nights that messes with your head. Everyone thinks it's just a schedule adjustment. You sleep during the day, you work at night, what's the big deal? But it isn't that simple. Your brain never really accepts it. You're awake when the world is asleep, and you sleep when the world is alive. You become out of step with everything, even yourself. And when your shift happens to be in an old, creaking middle school with barely any lights, echoing hallways, and a boiler room that feels like it leads straight to hell itself, yeah, it does something to you. This was in 2012. I had been working as a night custodian at a middle school for about a year. The school wasn't the worst I'd ever seen, but it was old, built in the 50s, barely renovated since then. The hallways were lined with yellowed tiles, the lockers dented and chipped, and the air always smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, no matter how much you cleaned. The worst part of the job, hands down, was the boiler room. Every school has one, tucked somewhere in the basement or off near the gym. This one was underneath the gymnasium, a cavernous concrete dungeon with huge rusting boilers, hissing pipes, and narrow corridors lined with valves that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The air was hot and damp, the walls always slick with condensation, and the smell, it was like oil mixed with mold, a heavy stink that stuck to your clothes long after you left. I hated going down there. Everyone did, but the boiler room had to be checked every single night. The principal was paranoid about the heating system failing, so he made it part of the nightly checklist. That responsibility usually fell to the newest hire, and in 2012, that was me. At first, it was just creepy. I'd bring my flashlight, clipboard, and radio, walk through the pipes, check the gauges, and get out as quickly as possible. But after a while, I started hearing things. The first time it happened, it was almost subtle. I had gone down the stairwell, flashlight in hand, and the door slammed shut behind me like it always did. The echo rattled down the concrete steps, bouncing off the walls. The air grew heavier the deeper I went, the sound of the boilers groaning like some ancient beast waking up. As I stepped onto the boiler room floor, I heard it. Voices. At first, I thought it was the pipes. That place was always alive with sound, steam hissing, water rushing, metal groaning. But this wasn't that. It was faint, like a murmur carried from far away. Two voices, low, hurried, almost arguing. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing. The voices stopped. Instantly. I stood there for a solid minute, flashlight trembling in my hand, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. Just the steady hiss of steam. I convinced myself it was the pipes. That sound had carried weirdly. Or maybe some kids had broken in upstairs and I'd heard them faintly through the vents. That explanation got me through the night, but it didn't explain what happened the next time. A few nights later, I was back in the boiler room. I kept my radio on loud, music playing softly from the station just to keep me company. I was halfway through checking the gauges when the voices started again. This time they were clearer. Two people whispering fast like they were deep in some secret conversation. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam just lit up pipes and shadows. I gripped my clipboard tighter, swallowing hard. And then, "David." I froze. I swear to God I heard it. My name. Spoken softly, deliberately, as if whoever it was wanted me to know they were talking to me. David. Louder this time, coming from somewhere behind the boilers. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I called out again, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Who's down here?" Silence. I backed out slowly. Flashlight aimed straight ahead and didn't stop moving until I was up the stairs and back in the gym. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the sound of my name over and over again, the way it echoed, the tone. Not mocking, not angry, just knowing. Like whoever it was already knew me. I almost quit that week. But I needed the job, and my supervisor wasn't the type to listen to excuses about creepy noises, so I kept going back. One night, trying to distract myself, I wandered into the boiler room's tiny office. It was a cramped little space with a desk, filing cabinets, and shelves lined with binders. On the desk was a thick, dusty binder labeled Maintenance Logbook. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside were pages of handwritten notes going back decades. Every janitor or maintenance worker who checked the boilers had to sign the log. It was tradition, apparently. Each entry had a date, time, signature, and sometimes notes about issues with the system. The older the entries got, the shakier the handwriting. Some of the ink had faded almost completely. I flipped through page after page, dozens of names I didn't recognize. But then I noticed something strange. Next to some of the older names, someone had drawn a small cross in pencil. At the bottom of one page, I found the word, "deceased." My stomach tightened. Why the hell would a maintenance log keep track of who had died? I flipped another page. My hands went cold. There, near the bottom, in messy, uneven handwriting, was my name. David Miller. The date column was blank. I dropped the binder like it had burned me. It hit the desk with a dull thud, pages fanning open. My signature stared up at me from the yellowed paper. But it wasn't mine. The letters were slanted differently, the handwriting rougher, jagged, but it was my name. I backed out of the office, heart racing, sweat dripping down my neck. That night, the voices were waiting. As soon as I stepped into the boiler room, they started. No more whispering. No more hushed tones. They shouted, "David!" The sound echoed off the concrete surrounding me, coming from every corner. I spun in circles, flashlight beam cutting through steam, but there was no one. "David! David!" I ran up the stairs, two at a time, slamming into the door so hard my shoulder ached. I locked it behind me, chest heaving. For the first time in my life, I called in sick the next day. And the day after, and the day after that, when I finally forced myself to go back, the logbook was gone. I searched everywhere, the office, the shelves, the desk, nothing. The binder had vanished like it had never been there, but on the back boiler, scratched deep into the rusted metal, were words that hadn't been there before. "You're next." The letters were crude, jagged, like someone had carved them with a knife or a piece of metal. I didn't even finish the inspection. I left everything, flashlight, clipboard, radio down there, and walked straight out of the school. I quit a week later. I haven't set foot in that school since. I don't talk to anyone I used to work with. Sometimes I wonder if any of them have seen the logbook or if they hear the voices too. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I swear I hear it again. A faint whisper rising out of the dark corners of my room. David. Sometimes louder, sometimes angry. And I think about the blank space next to my name in that logbook, the empty date column waiting to be filled. I know one day it will be, and I know who's going to write it.